Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope that you can hear me okay. I'm going to go ahead and give everyone like 1 to 2 minutes to show up for this webinar, just so that everyone has a chance to be able to listen to all of the information that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and start this presentation at maybe like 2:01 or 2:02, just depending on how many people show up within that time. So. Awesome. Yay, thank you for letting me know that you can hear me. Sometimes my mic does not work, and so that is helpful. I appreciate it. Okay. I don't see anyone else trickling in terms of the attendance. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. The first few slides are introductory slides anyway. So if you are still joining or you're just joining, then you still have a little bit of time before I get into the content. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen real quick. Okay. Awesome. Cool. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Perfect. Okay. So, hi, everyone. My name is Kai. I am a quantitative and statistics research consultant here at Statistics Solutions. And welcome to the webinar today on APA editing, how to avoid the most common mistakes. So this webinar is going to be recorded, or is currently recording, so that you're going to be able to watch it back at any time. I believe that these webinars are available to you within 24 to 48 hours following this recording. My coworker Sierra also put some information on the chat about some resources, and then also accessing this webinar once it is recorded. So if you are interested or have any questions about that, Sierra will probably be able to answer that in the chat while this is going on. Additionally, if you do have any questions, I have a section at the end for questions and answers, but if you have any questions kind of throughout the PowerPoint, please go ahead and either put it in the chat. There's also should be a Q&A section on Zoom. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and put them in either of those two areas, and I will get to it at the very end. Additionally, stick around to the end because I also have some information on our company's Statistics Solutions and how we can help you to work on your dissertation. So I do have some information on this first slide, and it's this email, this info@statisticssolutions.com. So if you are interested in working with us, this email is probably the best way to get in touch with us. But I do, like I said, I do have more information kind of at the end of these slides. So if you are interested, please stick around for that. Okay. Doesn't look like anyone else is joining. I just wanted to make sure before I went ahead so that nobody missed any content. But let's go ahead and get started now officially. Oh, maybe if I can get, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay. So first things first. APA stands for the American Psychological Association, and they put out these rules and regulations for writing in research. So specifically, APA consists of two main parts. So that first part is grammar and style, and that second part is your references. So in this PowerPoint, we're going to start with grammar and style, and then afterwards, we're going to talk a little bit about references. And then finally, at the end, we're going to talk about some specific details of the APA 7th edition that I think are really important when writing your paper. And then finally, we'll get into the question and answer section. So like I said, starting with grammar, The first thing to keep in mind when you are writing research is the voice that you are writing in, specifically passive versus active voice. So APA style prefers the use of an active voice or a structure in which the subject performs an action rather than a passive voice in which the action is not clear. So a good example of this is by using the researcher as the subject of the sentence and action, rather than stating something along the lines of the study was just conducted. Conducted by who? Studies don't just appear in thin air. Someone has to do them and conduct them and perform them. So an active voice would be something along the lines of the researcher conducted the study in a controlled setting, versus a passive voice is the study was conducted in a controlled setting. They both make sense and they both are, grammatically correct, but one of them places the emphasis on the person conducting the study, whereas the second one places the emphasis on the study itself, being the doer of the action, which just doesn't make as much sense unless you're putting it into that active tense, which is the researcher being the one who conducted the study. Oh, I'm so sorry. I just choked on my own spit there for a second, which is kind of disgusting to say out loud. So I probably shouldn't have said that. But anyway, where was I before I choked a little bit? So like I said, there are some exceptions to this, though. So one of those specific exceptions is in chapter 4, when instead of the emphasis being placed on the researcher, we're actually placing the emphasis on the recipient or your participants of the study. So instead of saying, the researcher had people perform this, in chapter 4, you're going to say something along the lines of, the participants were asked to do this. The participants were then told to do this. And so that emphasis is being placed on the participants rather than the researcher. Additionally, another exception can occur in chapter 3 when you're talking about your participants as well. And then finally, to fix these passive sentences, because they always do kind of show up, a lot of the times people's default in writing is to write in passive sentences unless you have actively tried to write in active sentences. And so the easiest fix is to literally just include the doer of the action in the sentence. So if the action is conducted, just make sure that you're including the researcher. If the action is taking a survey, make sure that you include that the doer is the participant. Okay. So additionally, in terms of grammar and style, you are going to want to avoid what is known as anthropomorphism. And what this means is that you want to avoid speaking as if the study has found something or as if the article has discussed something. Basically, what this means is we don't want to attribute characteristics to inanimate objects or ideas. And in this case, a study finding something, a study is not a person, a study is not human, a study is just a thing. And it didn't find anything. You found something using your study, or the researcher found something using their study. So it's important to make sure that stuff like, this study, this experiment, this article being discussed isn't the main subject. One, they're not the main subject of the sentence, which kind of goes back to the past slides. And then 2, we also want to make sure that we're not acting as if these things are doing it on their own, when in reality, you are the researcher and you're doing these things. So just make sure that that is kind of reflected within your paper. There are some examples here. So, a correct example is the researcher found the following results, as opposed to the study found the following results. Or if you're talking about an article that has been previously published, correct way of saying it would be, Smith et al. Or Smith 2004 discussed blah, 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 rather than saying this article discussed. The article didn't discuss anything. The article is just words on a paper. Whoever wrote the article discussed blah, 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 blah. I hope that makes sense. Okay. So tense use is another very important aspect of APA writing. And this is because there are certain tenses that are appropriate at certain times, which can be a little frustrating, but as a general rule, it's not as complicated as it might sound. So in general, in the proposal stage, so before you have actually conducted the study, before you have collected any of the data, usually in your proposal stage, you are making sure that all the instruments are correct, making sure you know your participant base, all that fun stuff, right? So that is the stage in which you're going to refer to your study in the present or in the future tense. So you're going to say something along the lines of, the researcher will ask participants to do this. So that's in the future tense, right? Or I can't come up with a better example of that, but and this is to denote that you have not conducted this study yet, but that you plan to, and this is how you plan to do this. So again, I'm just going to repeat that one time. In general, in the proposal stage, you are going to refer to your study in the present and future tense, as you have not yet conducted the study, but you will soon. However, once the proposal is then approved, and then you go to actually, write your chapter 4, collect your data first, analyze your data, and then write your chapter 4 and your chapter 5, you are then going to switch everything, even the stuff that you have written before, into past tense. And this is to denote that you have conducted the study and this is what was done. So this includes writing the results as well, especially writing the results. Chapter 4 and chapter 5 should never even be written in present or future tense. The first 3 chapters will be originally written in present and future tense. And then after your proposal stage, usually people will have you, or your professors will have you, go back through those first 3 chapters and change all of those present and future tenses to past tense. It's tedious, but it's just the way of APA. That's kind of a fun pun, but yeah, APA is kind of known to be a little bit tedious. Some of their rules are a little silly, in my opinion, but as a general rule, it makes it really easy to be able to read any research paper in any subject and kind of know what's going on. And that's why APA is really important. Oh, and then finally on this slide, last thing I wanted to talk about was using past tense when referring to what other researchers did. So even in chapters 1 through 3, if you're talking and you're in your proposal stage, if you're talking about something that a different researcher that is not you has done in the past, that they have published in the past, and unless it was published 2 days ago, even then that's the past, or unless it's, actually, no, there's no sense in which you're not going to be using the past tense. And that's because, Smith et al. 2014, they wrote what they found, and what they wrote was all in 2014 or probably even earlier. The publication process for papers is usually very long and takes a lot more than a year. So even if you finish your study in, say 2014, your study probably won't be published until at least 2015, 2016. So even if you're talking about things that were published this year, in 2023, chances are that they were actually conducted a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. And so it's important to always talk in the past tense when referring to other researchers and published results. If anyone has any questions about that, like I said, please use the chat. I'd be more than happy to talk a little bit more about the tenses. I know it can be a little confusing. Oops, sorry guys. Did I skip it? I did skip it. Sorry. Sorry about that. So next is capitalization. When to use it and when not to use it is kind of an important distinction in APA style. So on this slide, we're going to talk about when to use capitalization. And then on the next slide, we're going to talk about when not to use capitalization. I'm going to take 1 second and take a sip of water just because my throat's kind of closing up again. And I don't really know what's going on, but I just feel parched. Okay, sorry about that, y'all. So capitalization should be used on all major words in titles and headings, including all words of our. Oh, sorry. Just read that so wrong for a second there. But basically what I was saying is it should be used on all major words and titles. So all of the off words as well. So if you're using words like to or for, those should, transition words in sentences should also be capitalized as well. Capitalization should also happen for journal titles, and reference titles should be capitalized as well. So that's an example of that is something like the literature review section or the methodology section. Those are reference titles, and those should be capitalized. Finally, any instrumentation, tests, or surveys should also be capitalized. So if you're using something like the Minnesota Multi-Factor Personality Inventory, every single word of that scale or instrumentation or test, or it's a test, should be capitalized. So same with something like a multi-factor leadership questionnaire. That being said, theory names should not be capitalized. So something like, let's say the misinformation paradigm, which is an actual, test. It's not a theory or anything. So that would be capitalized. However, if you're talking about the misinformation effect, which is the theory that the misinformation paradigm is based on, you're not going to capitalize something like misinformation effect. And that kind of gets us in when not to capitalize stuff. So, like I said on the last page, names of theories are not going to be capitalized, as well as generic titles of tests. So if you're interested in looking at people's stress, but you're just calling it a stress test, then something like stress test does not need to be capitalized. However, if you're talking about, an actual name for a stress test, I'm kind of blanking on names for stress tests right now, but that's when you're going to capitalize it, versus when you're just saying something like stress test, don't capitalize that. Additionally, only the first word of a title of an article in a reference section is going to be capitalized. So on this slide, I have an example here of like Henderson, JC, and, all these names, 1993. And then you see that strategic alignment, the first word strategic is capitalized, but alignment is not. And then the only reason leveraging is capitalized is because we've got that colon right after alignment. If there wasn't a colon after alignment, everything after strategic is going to be non-capitalized. Additionally, if you are using any, like I said, shortened, exact, or generic titles of a test. And then if you're talking about any laws, theories, or models, or statistical procedures. So something like cognitive behavioral theory or, the misinformation effect is not going to be capitalized. Additionally, if you're talking about like running a regression, that's not going to be capitalized. Okay. So next is going to talk about, abbreviations and acronyms and kind of when to use them. So as a general rule, abbreviations should be used if a certain title of something is mentioned more than 4 times in a paper. So say that you are interested in talking about the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC. Then you are going to abbreviate that or use if you talk about it more than 3 times, or you're going to use an acronym for that if you talk about it more than 4 times. So if you're just talking about the Center for Disease Control and Prevention once, don't worry about using an acronym, and you really shouldn't use an acronym in that sense, because if you just write CDC without actually writing what that means, it's not going to make any sense. But if if your whole paper kind of hinges on the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, you're not going to want to write out the Center for Disease Control and Prevention every single time. Because for a lot of these papers, especially if that's, your control population, or some sort of variable is coming from this data, then you're probably going to talk about it a lot, and it's going to be really annoying for not only you but the reader to read Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Like, I'm already getting tired of saying it, and I've only said it a couple times. So the rule for this, though, is that if you are using it, 3 or more times in a paper, you should definitely abbreviate it or use an acronym. However, it should be known that those abbreviations or acronyms, it should be defined at least once in the paper. So like I said, if we're using the Center for Disease Control and Prevention example, then, you're going to write out Center for Disease Control and Prevention once, put parentheses CDC in that parentheses, and then every time after that, you're able to use CDC without writing out Center for Disease Control and Prevention, but only if you have it written out and defined at least once. The same kind of goes for abbreviations. So like, maybe you're writing the word neurotypical a lot, and that's, you're just sick of writing the word neurotypical, and you want to abbreviate it to like NT. Then as long as the first time you mention the word neurotypical, you're putting in those parentheses NT, every time afterwards, you're able to use that NT when talking about neurotypical people or something like that. Oh, and then finally, per APA, we only use the abbreviation of the United States or the US if it's as an adjective. So something like the US Navy. But every other time, no matter what, you're gonna spell out the United States, unless it's like US Navy or US citizen, or something that is describing the actual noun. But if the United States is being used as a noun, then we're not going to abbreviate it. Okay, and then the last important aspect of grammar and style in APA is the use of numbers in APA format. So according to the APA rules, you can use numerals, or the actual number, when the number is over 10, so over the value of 10, or if it represents a time, date, or score. So if you're talking about 2 years, or 5 years, or item 1, or a score of 2, even though those things are under the number of 10, they, or like 2 months, 2 days, something like that, that it's, denoting some sort of time or score or date. And so therefore it's still going to be able to use the numerals. That being said, every other time, so if it's under 10, or it does not denote, and it does not denote these time, dates, or scores, then you are going to actually write out the number. So if you're saying, 2 participants, it's going to be TWO rather than 2. Whereas if you have 10 participants, then you're going to use the number 10. Additionally, this also goes for if that number begins a sentence title or heading. So even if it's over the number of 10, if that number begins the sentence, then it's going to look really weird when your sentence starts with the number 10. So instead, you're going to write out 10, TEN. Additionally, any common fractions, so like 1/3, 2/4, some more, well, 2/4 is 1/2, but you get what I'm saying. So any common fractions like that is going to be also spelled out. And then finally, I didn't mention this earlier, but in terms of when you are using numerals, you are always going to use numerals in your abstract. So if you're talking about maybe something what the study found or how many participants you had, even if that's the number 2, you're going to use that as a numeral if you're talking in your abstract. So, like I said, the next biggest section of APA is citations and references. And this is probably where people have the most issues. And for probably good reasons. Citations can be a little confusing if you don't fully understand the rules. Okay. Sorry, take another sip of water. So it is important when discussing other people's ideas or work that we do not plagiarize. Instead, you should always be attempting to put the author's ideas into your own words with what is known as paraphrasing instead. I'm sure you guys all know the difference between plagiarism and paraphrasing, but it is very important when it comes to citing. So a big tip that I always give people is that when you are taking notes on a research paper, to never take those notes directly from the text. Instead, so what I'm saying is if it's on your computer, and you're also taking notes on your computer, don't just copy and paste whatever sentence that is from the research paper into your notes, right? Instead, write those notes down in your own words or type those notes in your own words. And this does 2 things, right? One, it has helped you to better understand the material because you have encoded it in your own words in your memory. But also you're less likely to plagiarize that way. A lot of people will read a research paper once or twice. And, if you're just copying and pasting sentences from the research paper and, maybe you're doing this fast and you don't even put quotation marks around it. Maybe 2 or 3 months down the line, when you're going back to look at your notes, you go, wow, that's a great way of writing that. And you probably might not even recognize that that's not your own words. And those are instead the words from the actual paper, because maybe you didn't put quotation marks around it because you were just writing really fast. You didn't have time. And so it is important to write it in your own words, because like I said, that's going to help you not to plagiarize. Another way to avoid plagiarism, and this is probably very self-explanatory, is to always cite your sources, literally always, constantly. So even if it seems like it is a common piece of knowledge, like something along the lines of the sky is blue, chances are that it is not a common piece of knowledge and that not everybody knows this. And if you are stating it as if it is just a general fact, and you have nothing to back up your sources with, people are going to be like, where did this person get this information from? And in some cases, they might even think that you have come up with this information. And if you're not directly citing it, if you're not having a source to kind of go along with that information, either people are not going to believe you, or they are going to believe you way too much, and you will have then plagiarized someone. And so, like I said, even if it's seems like a common piece of knowledge, chances are that it's not, and you should really always be citing where you found that information. Additionally, using proper citation strengthens your credibility as a researcher. And this kind of goes the other way too. So if you're referencing something poorly or you don't include a lot of references, people are going to think that you're not very skilled as a researcher, or at very least not very skilled at doing independent research or, information collection. And so because we are citing all of our sources of information, we are going to need what is known as a reference list. So a reference list goes at the end of your paper, so very last page, and it's usually you usually do a page break, and then your reference section shows up. And this list is going to list out each of the article authors, title, and date for all of the articles that you discussed within your paper. So this list is going to be in alphabetical order, and it should match up with all of the articles that you talked about within the actual paper itself. Any online sources. So if you got an article online and you have the retrieval information, such as, an actual website link or a DOI, then include that retrieval information so that anyone reading through your references is able to just easily pull up that reference or article. I have some information here on the screen called Crossref. It's a database, and it's pretty helpful in terms of kind of reading through your paper and making sure that all of your sources are cited correctly. So there's also other sites like this as well. I think EndNote is also a site that does something like this. And I've used EndNote a lot more extensively than I have Crossref, but Crossref is also really good in terms of helping you figure out if all of your stuff is cited correctly. Additionally, Crossref and EndNote both look through your papers and make sure that everything that's in the references section is also within your text as well. And so, as well as having a reference list at the end, APA also requires that you cite all of your sources of information within the text as well. And so this is what is called as an in-text citation. So we're going to have two forms of references. One is the reference page that I explained before at the end of your paper, everything in alphabetical order. And then two are going to be your in-text citations. And so what I mean by this is when you're actually writing and you're talking about maybe an article that's been published before by Smith et al. 2012, for example, then you're going to make sure that any information that you get from that article that you're gleaning, maybe their findings, maybe any truth of the universe, I don't know, stuff. There's some stuff in research articles that are important. You get what I'm saying. And so if you're including any of that within your actual paper itself, you're going to want to cite that where you found that information right after you state it. Or right before you state it. And so there are two ways to reference an article within the text. So first is referencing the article as the subject of the sentence. And the way we do that is by using the first author's last name. If there's multiple authors, it's going to be first author's last name, second author's last name if there's only two authors. And then if there's anything more than three authors on a paper, which is pretty common, then you're going to use something called et al. At the very end. So it's going to be something like, maybe this paper, Smith et al. 2012, maybe they have 5 people. It would be really crazy. I mean, not crazy, but it would be annoying to write out every single 5 person who are on this study, every single name of those people, just to reference that. And so instead, you're going to use the first author's last name, et al., if it's anything more than 3 authors, and then a period. And then in parentheses, you're going to use the year that the study was published. And so you're going to use that as the subject of the sentence. So Smith et al. Found that blah, 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 blah. Alternatively, the other way that you could reference an article is at the end of the sentence. And so instead you could write, the researchers found that blah, 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 blah. And then at the end of the sentence, parenthesis, Smith, again, if there's more than 3 people on the paper, et al., period, comma, and then the date with a closed parenthesis and a period at the end. People who do this right usually mix up which ones they're using. So if, you start a sentence off with Smith et al. Found that blah, 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 the next article that you reference, you might not want to say, and Dimitri et al. Found this instead. So instead you might say Smith et al. Found that, the more stressed you are, the more susceptible you are to misinformation. I don't know, man. I don't know. I mean, that was what my paper was on, but my last name's not Smith. Anyway, and so, more stressed you are, the more susceptible you are to misinformation. And then period, right? So that's your first in-text citation. And then, switch it up again for your second in-text citation. So maybe you found researchers who conflicted with that information and they said, actually, no, the more stressed you are, the less susceptible you are to misinformation. And so you then say, next sentence, however, other researchers have found that the more stressed you are, the less susceptible you are to misinformation. And then at the end, you put in parentheses, Dimitri et al. 2012 or something like that. And so, like I said, the best researchers kind of switch up their in-text citations references, but there's not a solid, perfect way to do one or the other. So if you really want to just stick to it with the references being the subject of the sentence the whole time, that's totally fair. If that's how you want to write it, that's how you want to write it. And then last thing I wanted to talk about on this slide is that I think I mentioned it earlier, but any sources that you cite in the text should also be found in the full references section at the end. Okay. And so this is the kind of the last portion of this PowerPoint, and then we're going to get into the questions and answers and stuff like that. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about some writing and formatting rules in APA 7th edition. And I wanted to specifically talk about these rules just because I think these are some of the writing rules that people get a lot mixed up, even though that, they do seem a little complicated at first, but a lot of them is just getting used to the way that this style is supposed to be written. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about is the heading levels. And so we have headings at the beginning of, each new set of ideas. And these headings are a little bit different depending on what level that we're going to be on. So level 1 headings are going to be centered, they're bold-faced, they're title case heading, and any new text is going to begin as a new paragraph. These are going to be something like your chapter 4 results section is going to be a level 1 heading. So, literally bolded at the very top, centered, chapter 4 results. A lot of the times people use like introductions as a level 1 heading, stuff like that, right? Our level 2 headings are going to be their information within the level 1 that is still maybe a little bit more distinct, right? So, if you talked about your level 1 headings, maybe your introduction, then your level 2 heading might be your research questions and hypotheses, especially in chapter 4. Those research questions and hypotheses are probably going to be a level 2 heading. And so what you're going to do is instead of it being centered, you're kind of centering it to the left. So flushing left, it's still going to be bold-faced. It's still going to be title case heading, but any new text is also going to begin as a new paragraph. And then level 3 is, again, if you have any information within that level 2 that's still maybe a little bit more distinct, right? So a good example of this is in your results section, maybe your level 2 heading is hypothesis testing. And then your level 3 heading is the assumption tests. So, level 2 is saying, these are the tests we ran. Level 3 is saying, these are the assumptions that we had to run before we ran the test. This level 3 is going to be also flush left and bold-faced, but it's going to be italicized. And again, any new text is beginning as a new paragraph. From there's like 7 levels, so I could go through 4, 5, and 6. But if you are interested in some of these levels, Purdue OWL, I believe that's the website, what it's called, has a really good resource for writing the headings and what those headings should look like and kind of when to use them. I personally love Purdue OWL in terms of their help with APA formatting, especially if you don't like flipping through an APA manual. Next, I just wanted to talk about the use of bias-free language. So in APA 7th edition, there's kind of a big emphasis on using this bias-free language. So one example is that the singular they is recognized by APA as a correct grammar usage. And so if you're using it if the gender of your participants is either unknown or irrelevant, and that, in some cases is very poignant. And then also you're using the singular they for any person who uses they as like their personal pronouns. Additionally, APA puts an emphasis on what is known as person first language. And I know there is some debate on person first language versus identity first language, and kind of which one is better for people. And I do know that it's a personal preference on a general sense in most cases. However, that being said, in terms of APA, like I said, puts a really big emphasis on this person first language. And so rather than saying an epileptic man, you are going to say something along the lines of a man with epilepsy. Or instead of saying the poor, you're going to say people living in poverty. And I do know a notable exception of this is autistic and people who have autism, and which one you should be using. I really think that deferring to the autistic community is important on that one, because I do know that they have some debates on whether or not person first language versus identity first language is something that's more appropriate. But like I said, as a general rule, person first language is the way to go. Additionally, you want to be specific about these identities and these people, right? So are we talking, we're talking about Americans. Well, there's a lot of different people who are American, right? We have Korean Americans, we have Asian Americans, we have African Americans, we have Caucasian Americans, we have a lot of different versions. And unless, you are literally just looking at the general population of America, which is totally possible and totally fair, you want to be specific on what types of people you're looking at. So instead of saying, just men, there's a lot of different types of men. Are we talking about trans men? Are we talking about cisgender men? Or are we talking about everyone, right? And so it really just depends on, your paper. But it is important to be specific about the groups of people that you're talking about. Oops, sorry, I did not mean to bump the mic there. So if it sounded a little weird there, I'm really sorry. Okay. Next is talking about tables and figures. So I just wanted to give kind of a little example on how tables and figures are kind of formatted in APA format, because a lot of people get really confused about the tables, understandably. And so they are formatted in parallel, and they all kind of follow the same format, right? So the number of the table, the number of the figure is always going to be bolded and at the top. Right underneath the number, so, maybe table 10 or table 5 or table 9, depending on how many tables you already have. Then right underneath that, you're going to have the title of the table. And so this title is going to be a description of what these people are going to see in the table, what they're going to see in the figure, right? And this is always going to be italicized, not bolded. From there, we actually get into the table and the figure, right? So our headings is going to be the top columns or the top row, and our columns, right? So our column names. So column 1 is the variable, column 2 is the frequency, right? And then right underneath, that's going to be the actual body of your table and figure. And so that's what's going to actually make up, the numbers or the categories or whatever you're trying to present. That's what's going to go in the body. I'm going to keep this up on the screen for one more second, but I do have an example that I think helps a little bit more when looking at kind of how your tables should be formatted. Okay, like I said, nice little example on this slide. So on this slide, as you can see, our table number is bolded at the top. Right underneath, we have the title of that table. So results of curve fitting analysis examining the time course of fixations to the target. I don't know what any of that means. From there, oh, and that's italicized. From there, that's going to be the heading. And so, like I said, that heading is the description of what's going to be in the columns underneath. So logistic parameter is obviously our variables of some kind. From there, we have a group for 9-year-olds and we have a group for 16-year-olds, and we have our means and standard deviations as well for each of those 2 groups. Then we have a T statistic and our degrees of freedom, P value, and a Cohen's d, which is our effect size. Underneath that is actually the body of our table. And so in that body is going to be, you know, the actual variables that we're looking at, the actual values for those means and standard deviations, the values for our p values, and so on and so forth. Also, if you notice, there are no vertical borders in this table, and that is for a reason. APA really focuses on clarity and readability for layman users, for people who are just, you know, reading your study and don't really know what's going on. It is a lot easier to read a table when it doesn't have these harsh vertical borders. And so we really want to limit the use of these borders for clarity. So most tables only have borders at the very, very top, right underneath the heading, and then at the very, very bottom as well. We do have another vertical or horizontal border under 9 and 16-year-olds, but that is only because, you know, that's kind of a subsection, or means and standard deviation are a subsection of each of those sections. If those 9 and 16-year-olds weren't there, there would not be a horizontal border. And then finally, tables and figures can either be placed within the text of the paper or within your appendix section. It really is up to you. Some people really prefer it being within the text, and then some people are very picky about it and only want to see tables in the appendix. They only want to see words and numbers in the actual text. And if you have any sort of tables or figures, just link them to the appendix. So check with your advisors, or, you know, your outlines of, you know, if you have a rubric for the paper that you're writing, check with that to make sure whether or not you should be putting your tables and figures either in your appendix or within the text. As a general rule, I prefer them in the text just because it makes it a little bit easier, I think, to understand the results that way. But again, it is up to you. It is up to your advisor. Some people are picky about it. And then finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about in-text citations. So like I said a little bit earlier, all sources with 3 or more authors are going to use et al. After the author's first name. And it's beginning with the first author's first name. The only exception is if 2 papers have the same first author listed with the same author names and like the same dates, right? So, you know, if Smith et al. Or Smith, whoever Smith is, put out like 2 papers one year where he was actually the first author listed on both of those papers, that is the only time in which you are going, and it would be really confusing to talk about Smith et al. 2014 paper 1 versus Smith et al. 2014 paper 2, especially if those papers are on 2 different things. So if that is the case, then you are going to list the first 2 authors' names to differentiate. And then in terms of references, this is not going to be the case. You're not going to use et al. In your references. So instead, the actual reference section, you should include all of the authors up to 20 in a reference list. So even if there's 5 authors and in the in-text citation, you said Smith et al., in the references, you should say Smith and Daughtry and so and so and so and so and so and so, and kind of so on and so forth from there. In terms of references, your DOIs and URLs, which are your links, should be presented in hyperlink form for electronic sources. So that means that when, you know, you're including a link to an article, the researcher or the reader, should be able to click on that, and it should take them to the website or the article, whatever is being referenced. And then APA used to say that you had to say where you retrieved the information from. This is no longer the case, except for when a retrieval date is used. So, you know, maybe, and this is on kind of a case-by-case basis. So if your mentor, your committee member, they said, hey, when did you actually look up this article? I want you to include that. That's the only time that you're going to include the words like retrieved from. Oh, did I have something else? Oh yeah, sorry, I skipped something. Okay, and then finally, I promise this is the last of the information, and then in the last 10 minutes, I will go ahead and kind of answer those questions that I see in the chat or that I assume are in the chat. I haven't looked yet, but just some helpful tips. One, keep up with your formatting from the very beginning. I know it can be really easy to just kind of start writing your paper and go, oh, think about APA later. I don't want to think about it right now. It's kind of silly to do it that way, because at the end of the day, when you're done with this presentation, when you've gotten your dissertation approved, it's going to need to be in APA format to submit it. And trying to go back after the fact and put everything in APA format is a lot harder than just kind of putting it in that format as you're writing to begin with. So try to keep up from it with the very beginning. It is kind of important to kind of learn as you go, so that you're not making a bunch of edits at the very end. Also, I think it's important to keep a running list of references and check in regularly with your in-text citations. So there are, a lot of citation managers like EndNote that I was explaining earlier. There's also RefCat, which we were also explaining earlier. These could be really helpful in terms of, keeping a running list of your references. They do have some pitfalls, but they're not the end of the world. Another option could just be an Excel sheet, just keep an Excel sheet of all of the references that you've used. Maybe it's color coded where, if it's yellow, it was used in the introduction or your literature review section. If it's blue, it was used in your methodology section. And then, like I said, make sure that with those references, you're checking to make sure that they're accurate with the in-text citations, because it is important for your in-text citations to match up with your reference list. And then finally, if you have access to an APA 7th manual, it is a very nice reference manual, and it's not something that you need to memorize. APA as a general rule is not something that a lot of people have fully memorized. I use it every single day, and there are still things that I have to look up sometimes to go like, oh, I can't remember what APA says about this. Maybe I should just go check it up. And using the APA 7th edition manual, if you have that, is really helpful. If you don't have it, it is worth the investment. APA doesn't really change their rules for many years, and they actually just changed a couple of their rules. I believe it was in either 2019 or 2020, so fairly recently. So I doubt they're going to do it anytime soon again. So if you are willing to kind of pay that money, I don't think it's that much. They're on Amazon. I think it is worth the investment in spending it. If you don't want to, oh, excuse me, all that water. No, sorry. If you don't want to spend money on the APA manual, I was speaking earlier about a website called Purdue OWL. They are awesome in terms of kind of putting all of the APA rules in a really digestible format, and it's really good for searching as well. So if you're interested in that, I definitely recommend giving that a look as well. Okay, that's kind of all I had in terms of the information. So I'm going to go through the chat. It looks like a couple people have questions. So I will go through those and answer those. But before I do that, just one quick second. I wanted to talk a little bit about Statistics Solutions since I have you guys all here. So our company, Statistics Solutions, is a full service dissertation consulting company. We provide graduate students and professionals with, timely editorial support for their dissertations and scholarly projects. So we kind of really do everything. We can help with topic creation, writing the chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter your literature review. We help with editing chapter 3, coming up with validated instruments if you're having trouble with that. We can also help with data analysis plans. We do a full service with the chapter 4, meaning that if you pay for, SPSS chapter 4, then we will run the results, write up the results, and then have a call with you to kind of talk through the results a couple times. And then in chapter 5, very similarly to chapter 1, we kind of help, draft it. Well, we don't draft it, but we'll help you edit it. We'll give you comments on kind of where to improve, on what to add, that kind of stuff. We also help with, survey creation, survey upload, basically anything that you can think of, we probably help with in terms of a dissertation. So if you are interested in our services, we have 30-minute free consultations Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And so some of that information is up on the screen now. So since we only have a couple minutes left in this, I'm going to go ahead and just start answering these questions. Okay. So are there any free apps to run a paper through for unintentional plagiarism? Yeah, I believe actually Grammarly does have a plagiarism check, as far as I believe. I haven't used Grammarly in a little bit, but I used it in my grad school days, and it was really awesome for checking whether or not there are plagiarisms. I do believe that's not the free version of Grammarly, though. I'm not sure about any free apps, but Grammarly, the free version, is also really good as well, if that's something that you're interested in. Yes. Next question. Are all of these points designed around APA 7th edition? Yes, that's correct. So everything I talked about in this PowerPoint is APA 7th edition. The reason I talked specifically about the 7th edition earlier is just to give you some specifics on some things that people kind of mess up on. Is it okay if you don't locate a DOI number? Yeah, so if you can't find a DOI number, it's usually good to have some sort of a hyperlink or a URL link of some kind to link to. But if you don't have either of those things, it's not the end of the world. As long as you have the author's last names, date, and publication, as well as article title, you should be good. But yeah, if you don't have a DOI number, hopefully you have a URL number if you don't have a DOI number. Most articles do have a DOI number, though. It is up at the top of the publication, usually top right or top left, usually above the actual title of the article. Is it better to do the in-text citation with reference at the end and paraphrase? So like I said, it really just depends. Paraphrase always, I should have mentioned that earlier. APA does not like direct quotes, and unless it is truly, truly necessary, you should not be using direct quotes. Even if you put quotation marks around it, I wouldn't do it. I would paraphrase most of the time. And then, like I said, it really just depends on whether or not you want to put it at the end of the sentence, or if you want to put it at the beginning of the sentence as the subject of the sentence. Some people like to switch it up. Some people really like to just pick one and kind of go with it. And it really just depends on how you like to write. Sorry, I'm just reading. I was told to buy a physical copy of APA 7th and don't bother with Purdue OWL. I used to get Purdue OWL to get your master's program. That's totally fair. I mean, APA 7th edition manual is actually better. Like, it definitely is. I have both. I use Purdue OWL on the really small things. And like if I'm looking up the title headings and I'm like, oh, I don't remember the title headings today, then there's not really a point in putting the APA manual out sometimes with the title headings. It's silly. But yeah, if it comes to like, if you're thinking about maybe the format of, oh, I'm referencing something where it's an article within a textbook, Purdue OWL isn't necessarily the best thing to use for something like that, and the APA manual is probably better to use for something like that. But I do like Purdue OWL for kind of the smaller things. Yeah, APA 7th edition spiral bound manual has been a lifesaver for you. I hope it has. I love the manual. Like I said, I don't know a single person who uses APA on a daily who actually has every single part of it memorized. And so the manual is awesome. It's really helpful. How do you properly cite information from a Pew Research group? Yeah, so that's a good question. Not necessarily one that I can answer without all of the information, but like I said, if you do have an APA manual, that kind of information should be in there. But if you're talking about the research group as kind of the publisher, then that's where you're going to use the research group name is when you're talking about the publisher. Do you recommend a source for learning APA page text format? Everyone asking for a source for learning all this stuff. Like I said, Purdue OWL if it's small, but really the APA manual is awesome. And that's going to be, the most direct form of information about this stuff that you can get. And probably the most accurate form of information that you can get about this stuff. And it is, like someone said above, it is pretty easy to navigate. They have, a table of contents that's pretty easy to kind of get through. Do we have to cite any work when it comes to common methods? For example, the way we check for statistical assumptions. Yeah, totally do have to cite those things. Even if it's something like normality and, everyone looks at normality all the time, I would still cite that information. There's a lot of foundational documents that, are used for these assumptions and stuff like that. You just kind of have to know where to look for them. Awesome. But yeah, I think that's all the questions. So I'm just going to go back to that last question for 1 second. So like, the way we check for statistical tests, but even just the definitions of those statistical tests themselves. So if you're saying something along the lines of, I'm going to use, or the researcher is going to use, because we don't use I statements in research, no I statements, but the researcher is going to use a regression to do this, right? And then right afterwards, you should say something along the lines of, you should say something along the lines of, a regression is the appropriate statistical test for when you are looking for a predictive effect of one variable on another variable to see if, it predicts. It's a horrible sentence that I just made, but pretend it sounds a lot better. And you would even cite that sort of information. So like I said, even if it seems really common, even if people are using those statistics every single day and you know how to use those statistics and you know they're the right statistics, you should cite that information and of why you're using that statistic and kind of how you learned about doing it. But yeah, everyone's saying thank you. So thank you guys for showing up and asking really insightful questions. I love when these things are a little bit more interactive. So I appreciate everyone who did ask a question and who's just kind of been following along and keeping up with this. You guys are awesome. Like I said, Statistics Solutions is a full service dissertation company. So if you are interested in working with us, please go ahead and use the contact information on the screen. We would love to work with you in the future. And then we also do a lot of these webinars all the time. I think we do a couple a week, but don't quote me on that. Sometimes it might just be one a week. It depends on the schedule and stuff like that. But we do them really on everything. So we do them on, addressing committee feedback. We do them on the IRB and that process. We do it on presenting your results, writing your discussion, literature reviews, all that fun stuff. We have webinars like these monthly. So please feel free to sign up for another webinar if you did like this one. Awesome. Okay, y'all. Thank you so much. I do have another needing to get to. So I'm going to leave this on the screen for one more second and then kind of head out. But like I said, thank you so much for showing up, and I hope everyone has an amazing rest of their day. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take this off the screen and end the call. Bye, y'all.